now news organizations should just put the whole thing. I mean, that's what we do. This interview is not edited in any way. And if, we'll just let viewers decide what they think of Catherine Herridge or me or whatever, right? But so what would be the excuse that, say, NBC or CBS or ABC or Fox or anybody would have to not put the full thing online now?
I mean, I can't speak to what their rationale would be. I just know in my case, I felt it was important to release a transcript, to allow people to see the work, and to also, I mean, it's hard to look at your own transcript because you look at it and you say, oh, that question could have been more focused, or I should have followed up more, or I missed that little piece of news. I should have drilled down a little further, or I interrupted there when I really shouldn't have. I mean, it's really kind of warts and all process that you're looking at, but it's about sort of the raw integrity of the interview. When you make edits in an interview, you do it for clarity. Sometimes you do it because you have to condense things because you only have a certain amount of time on a broadcast. But it's a real fine line and a balancing act. And you don't want, seeking clarity and brevity or condensing it to cross the line into, a cleanup on aisle 7.
Well, that's what it feels like, though. It does feel like, I don't want to be too judgy. I was telling you at breakfast this morning, I edited something out of an interview once with somebody. I can't remember ever doing that before or since, and I would not do that now. But several years ago, someone said something so bizarre in an interview that I didn't want to follow up on it because I don't know, what the hell are you even talking about? Mm-hmm. And so I asked the editors to take that out just because I didn't think it was relevant to the conversation. It was weird. Mm-hmm. So whatever, I did that. I'll say that I did that. But if you're interviewing someone and he seems like bizarre through the whole interview and you find yourself trying to cover that up, then maybe you're a liar. Mm-hmm. Do you think?
Well, I think the instinct when you sit down with the president of the United States is this is your president. You want them to look their best. I mean, I understand that. Right. But if there were indicators, and I don't know there were, but if there were indicators that he was in decline or he was really struggling to answer a series of questions, I mean, that's news, right? I mean, that's a news headline.
Well, and the opposite of news is, of course, censorship and deception. So if you're hiding that, then you're committing, a moral crime, but you're also committing an offense against the profession that you chose, whose purpose is to inform the public of what reality is, right? And you're hiding things rather than exposing them. And that's pretty clear violation, isn't it?
Yeah. I think it's an opportunity to build the data set, to better understand what's happened over the last couple of years and, really apply that investigative lens. I find it so hard to take off my investigative reporter hat, but that's sort of how I see it right now. I'm curious. I'm genuinely curious to see what those transcripts may reflect.
Well, in 2016, NBC went and back into its archives and found an outtake of Donald Trump saying something vulgar to Billy Bush, the host, about women and grabbing them and all this stuff. And then they leaked it to David Fahrenthold. I think I'm remembering this correctly.
I can't remember that exactly, but it came out publicly.
If I've gotten that wrong, pardon me. But they leaked it to a Washington Post reporter who had been a college friend of an NBC executive. And then it became this huge thing that, almost derailed Trump's campaign. And that's why they did it, of course. So there's precedent for showing us the outtakes. Mm-hmm. Do they have an excuse not to show it to the Biden outtakes?
I mean, I can't really speak for them. I'm sorry to sort of be a little evasive about that. I just would advocate for it. I think that it's an issue of such import to the country, and it really informs the discussion and the discourse surrounding this issue. And it goes to accountability with the White House. Was it really a bad night, or was there a broader trend that had been developing?
Yeah. I mean, I feel totally qualified to pass judgment on that question.
Over to you.
I knew the guy, and that's not Biden. That's not the guy I remember. Mm-hmm. And I mean this. I never agreed with him, but I'm a shallow person. So is he. So I always kind of liked him because he's Irish guy, throw his arm around you. How you doing, buddy? Rub your chest. Maybe he sniffed me. I don't care. I like sniffing. And that's just not the guy on TV at all. At all. I mean, if I was a conspiracy nut, I would think he was a body double because it's that different. So anyway, in your long and varied career working in a bunch of different big media, the biggest media outlets in the country, Did you see people's political or social agendas shape news coverage a lot?
The short answer is yes. I think it's difficult for people to step back and do what I like to say I do, which is balls and strikes, right? People have their own personal lens through which they see stories. But I think you have to really park that at the front door when you go to work, because I think that's when you have the most transparent, credible, authentic journalism.
I agree with that. Do you feel like the composition of newsrooms has changed from when you started in the business? It feels like there was a greater, like, actual diversity of life experience back then, 30 years ago.
Hard to say. I started my career at ABC in London.
Yeah.
And that was an extremely rarefied atmosphere in a lot of ways.
Right.
These were very experienced people. A lot of the correspondents came out of Vietnam.
Yes.
Very, very deep experience. And I was very fortunate to learn in that environment.
This is when Jennings was still a force there.
Jennings had just left London by the time I had arrived. And I wanted to be a foreign correspondent. When you're that young, you have ideas. It looks so exciting to me.
Totally.
And some of the correspondents in the office really took me under their wing and taught me how to write a story by looking at the interviews, the strongest elements of the interview, the sound bites, and then they trained me to really sit down and look at the video and identify the strongest video, and then the natural sound, which really can be such an important technique.
Sound.
That's right. When you're editing a piece together, because it's really like this mosaic, the strongest sound, the best video, and the natural sound. So this was a really rarefied environment. Have I been in a newsroom like that since? I don't think so.
What was the difference? Was it smarter, more serious?
I just felt with that cohort of reporters, it was all about accountability journalism. I mean, to me, if that's part of my DNA, it's.
What does that mean, accountability?
Accountability journalism is when you're curious and you seek the facts, and then you try and figure out where the buck stops, right? And it's not a question of, well, it's this party or that party. It's whatever entity is responsible.
Right.
And accountability journalism is, like they say, speaking truth to power on both sides of the aisle.
To power is the key, though. I mean, accountability doesn't necessarily mean, hassling poor rural whites with diabetes, the weakest, most despised people in our society. It means asking questions about BlackRock and the National Security Council and the people who actually have all the power. It felt to me 30 years ago like that was implied. Like everyone sort of thought that your job was to hold the powerful accountable, not the weakest.
I still feel that way.
I do too.
Yeah.
I do too.
We have that in common.
I do too. Did you see that change?
Boy, I used to say to people that, technology was supposed to really improve our ability to do journalism, but I sometimes felt that the technology's never been better, but the reporting's never been worse. And I don't know why that is, except...
Is there a connection? I've never thought of it.
I think sometimes what we're missing is that boots on the ground, person-to-person contact in reporting. Years ago, when I did a journalism degree at Columbia, I had this professor, Dick Blood. That was his name. Dick Blood. And he was sort of a legend in New York City newsrooms. And he used to always say to me, detail matters in good reporting. If you go to a crime scene, you want to count how many bullet holes there are in the windshield. Agree. So I think there's that kind of on-the-ground, sort of real traditional investigative feel sometimes that's missing in that person-to-person contact.
Yes. Well, I agree with that. I remember going to a murder scene and looking down, there was blood all over my shoes. Mm-hmm. I didn't put that in the story, but I remember thinking, wow, that actually is shoe leather reporting. You took in a real sense of things when you can smell them.
When you think back to major events, I was in New York on 9/11, and we were down near the World Trade Center in the days right afterwards. And I saw someone who was collecting ash off the top of the cars. And at that point, we'd realized that all of the abandoned cars in downtown Manhattan belonged to people who had been killed in the towers. And I stopped this woman and I asked her what she was doing. And she said, my sister wasn't the Windows on the World at the top of the World Trade Center. She didn't survive, and I want to have something to bury for my family. So the ash is what I'm collecting. Mm-hmm. And that was the moment that I realized that so much of the ash that was spread around the city was really people and the buildings. And, that kind of tactile feel to the reporting is the kind of reporting that really impacts people and stays with them. And I don't know whether it's the technology or whether it's sort of the immediacy of all these deadlines, but the ability to do that is much harder now than it used to be.
Yeah. No, I think that's really smart. And technology gives you the illusion that all the information is on Google or a text away, when actually talking to people makes all the difference. Huh. So one phenomenon that I noticed, or that I actually didn't notice until I was in middle age, but
You're in middle age?
Well, that's what they claim.
Oh, okay.
Actually, I'm way past middle age. I'm not going to live to. I'm not good at math. 110. So I guess I'm in late life now. But there are beat reporters, people who've, covering federal agencies, particularly in Washington, who become captive to those agencies, to their sources, not in a literal sense. They're not held in the basement in chains, but they are sort of puppets of the people they cover. Like, I really noticed that. I'm thinking of one specific person who I'm not going to name, but I would just say a female national security reporter in Washington and I would watch these, stories come out and I'd be like, that's a lie. It's a lie. And you're doing it on behalf of the people who feed you these lies. Have you seen a lot of that?
I think that the danger is that people become sort of so friendly with the press offices that work in these big agencies that they find it hard over time to really challenge them.
That was never a problem for you, I noticed. Should say we work together. For people who don't know Catherine Herridge, one thing I've always loved about you, I don't even know who you vote for, and I mean that, but I did notice that a lot of the Flacks didn't like you, so I always thought that was a good sign.
You want to have the ability to really operate outside the ring. I used to say that one of the advantages to doing reporting, as long as I've done it, is that you start to build a network of contacts, so that's really where your stories are coming from.
Right.
And that the public affairs office in a major government entity is really the last stop for you, right? That's where you're trying to get some response. And I really believe in giving these offices ample time to respond. I did a story recently where we engaged with the Department of the Army and the National Guard for 2 weeks. I mean, we really gave them time because we wanted to understand their position and what had happened in a particular case. But sometimes the danger is that people become too close. That's why I think it makes sense in some cases to really rotate reporters so that you don't spend so long on a certain beat that you start to lose your contacts sort of outside of that circle.
Well, that's exactly, or you become a tool of lies, which some Pentagon reporters have become, I would